And now, from a frozen shed just north of New York City in the Fox News-dominated suburbs, comes a man so curious he's made a living out of asking questions to much smarter people. Such as, what do I do when the heater in the shed finally breaks down? And why isn't there a name for the week between Christmas and New Year's? Ladies and gentlemen, your host, announcer, editor, producer, and promoter, Pete Dominic. Thank you, me. I gave Pete Co. a couple days off. I mean, he's always welcome to make a introduction for the show, and we love them. But he's up in rural Oregon with the in-laws, and so hopefully he's having a great time with his family. Hello, my friends, and happy Taint Week, day 2 of Taint Week, that week between Christmas and New Year's where you really just don't know what you're supposed to do. Well, I'm taking a couple days skiing in the Adirondacks with my girls and my lady, and we are really looking forward to doing that for the first time in a long time. Since the girls were little, did all 4 of us get out there on the mountain. I hope that you are getting some nature and sending me those pictures. Send me your vitamin N pictures. Hashtag vitamin N in the subject to standupwithpete@gmail.com, no matter where you are. Got an excellent guest joining me today. It's a listener spotlight, longtime listener to the show. Extremely generous in so many ways to me. A guy who so many of you have gotten to know, especially through COVID, because he joined us at the Hangouts as a physician over and over. It was really nice to have him there to answer people's all kinds of nervous, curious questions. Dr. Barry Hummel joins me today for the Listener Spotlight conversation. I think you're going to like that. We covered a lot of ground with Barry. But very quickly, I just wanted to mention a couple of emails from yesterday. First of all, I asked folks to reach out to me and tell me what you're doing with Taint Week this week, which has no name, where you really don't know if you're supposed to be working or if anybody's even going to be answering their phone, email, much less a text, or if you're supposed to be taking time off. And why would you do that? Because everybody's going to take time off and every place is going to be crazy. Well, Mindy Cunningham came through with a very interesting and hilarious email. Mindy writes, during my Taint Week, I'm helping with a sick grandson, so I'm driving back and forth to Cincinnati to help with my dad and sprinkling in some yoga to make me sane. While at yoga this morning, the teacher was talking about this week between Christmas and New Year's in some sort of spiritual way. I said, I have a friend who calls it Taint Week. They all just looked at me and then immediately started cracking up. All throughout the class, we kept snickering. Best class ever. Happy Taint Week, Mindy. Thank you, Mindy. That made me laugh really hard, and hopefully other people appreciated that as well. And Phil Round did not like my conversation with OnlyFans star Jasmine Jafar, which I posted for yesterday's conversation here on Taint Week. He says, listen, on the Jasmine show, I think money corrupts anything and everything in a capitalist system. I'm far from being a prude, but I find her to be pathetic in catering to the lowest common denominator. If she's so brilliant, she could have joined Glenn Kirshner and tons of other people doing needed work instead of learning all the acronyms that her new work requires. Sorry, I'm just not impressed. Greed is the only motivation, and it's a stretch to call that a value. Being a lawyer is not just about, quote, helping rich people pay less taxes. I just couldn't make it through this episode, Pete. Phil, as always, I appreciate your honesty, and anybody else, always love to hear from you on what you liked and what you don't like. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Keep it coming, as well as your ideas of who I should have on the show. Maybe you. Send those emails over. Sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't already at standupwithpete.com. And now let's get to my conversation with Dr. Barry Hummel, who is a pediatrician. He's a husband. He is a father of 2 grown kids, one of which he hosts a podcast with, Abigail, Pops on Hops. Hopefully lots of you have already turned that show on and listened and subscribed to Pops on Hops. Barry and his daughter drink beer, talk about music, and it's really, really good. And a lot of listeners that listen to us here have discovered the show and love it. So check out popsonhopspod.com. Barry and I cover a lot of ground. His childhood in South Jersey, growing up with his parents owning a news rack, which is really cool, selling liquor as well at a liquor store. and going to medical school and becoming a dad and going out to Hollywood and working in the film industry with James Cameron at one point for several years. Barry's also a running coach. We talked a little bit about running and travel and family. And of course, we talked about COVID and Florida politics, Ron DeSantis, and his anti-tobacco smoking campaign that he's been running for years, Quit Doc. He is a multi-talented, very, very smart guy who I really enjoy talking to. And I think you'll get a lot out of this conversation. And hopefully you'll sign up to be a subscriber and you can come meet Barry at one of our hangouts. Ladies and gentlemen, my conversation with the always kind, thoughtful, brilliant, and a great storyteller, by the way, Dr. Barry Hummel. Your childhood, little Barry Hummel, growing up in South Jersey, his parents ran a store. They had like a deli with sundries. It eventually became a liquor store. And you worked in this, and this is it's a very interesting small business for your parent to own, because I'm sure it's a really hard business to own and run, and you're dealing with all kinds of stuff and people. But I mean, like, if your dad owns a store, you grow up in a store.
You really do.
And that meant your dad, basically one part of the store was a news rack. So like that was one of my places to hang out, at the news rack. I read comic books and magazines and I got candy. I mean, was that your childhood? Did you go to
Absolutely, it was my childhood. And until I probably started working there as a freshman in high school. But before that, absolutely. I remember going down. The big thing for me was the comics would come on Tuesdays out of New York. They would come down from the publishers up in the New York area, and they'd redo the rack. And I'd be able to go down. My parents would let me go down and pick out comic books and bring them home, as long as whatever I took made it back on the rack before they were going to be replaced. So if Spider-Man, the new November Spider-Man came out, I had to get it read and back on the rack before the December Spider-Man came out. And that was the coolest thing as a kid. I read so many great comic books in that era just because I had access to them.
I wonder how many kids in South Jersey at that time knew their comics were pre-read.
Nobody knew. You couldn't tell. You couldn't tell. But I read everything. I think I read.
You should have put a little tiny BH on one page of every.
So that was always a great thing. And then it was it was almost like initiation into the family. You started, the Sunday papers would come in from New York, primarily, like the New York Times, and they would come in bundles and you had to put them together. So all the sections were separate. And so the first job you got hired to do when you were entering the Hummel family tradition was you go down on Sunday mornings and put the New York Times together, or the Philadelphia Inquirer, or whatever the big papers were on Sunday. And so my aunt would come by the house and get me at 4:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning to go down there and work. Yeah, I know the hours were bad. And then work. I'd sit and work till about noon. They closed the store on Sundays at noon. The news agency, the liquor store, couldn't even be open on Sundays. And so I started that job. I was probably 14 or 15 when I started that job. I worked another night in the evening running the lottery machine. And then as I got older, I could work in the liquor store. So Christmas time is always an interesting time for me, because some of my fondest memories of the store were I would come home, even from college. I even did this from medical school one year. I came home to deliver on Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve was just a hot mess. It was the busiest day in the store all year. And part of the reason was because people would buy gifts for each other in town and have them delivered. So a doctor would buy all his doctor buddies wine, and my dad would have it all individually wrapped. And then another doctor would do the same thing, and another. And you'd have a case of wine to take to Dr. A and a case of wine to Dr. B. And so all day you're running gifts to offices, party trays to businesses that are having holiday parties on Christmas Eve. The town was abuzz. The traffic was awful. It was a small town, but it was a thriving town at the time. And at the end of the day, the only day they did this all year, my grandfather would make eggnog in the back room and spike it. They never drank in the store except Christmas Eve when they'd have the eggnog. And my grandfather would be back there tinkering with all these bottles to get just the right mix of booze in his eggnog. And then everybody would be walking around the store with eggnog. And that was like one of my favorite memories of the store, was working there on Christmas Eve.
I love that you shared that with us. And what a wild and interesting childhood. Being around, bundling all the newspapers. Did you have an early interest? Did your parents either instill it, or was being around actual newspapers interest you at all about what was in them?
It still does. I get a paper delivered here every day as a result of that. My dad would read back then there was morning papers and afternoon papers.
Right.
There was no internet, right? So the Philadelphia Daily News would have the late box scores from baseball the night before on the West Coast and all this kind of stuff he was interested in. So I remember him not only reading morning papers, but reading afternoon papers. Now, he did the same thing I did with the comics, right? He was taking them home, he was reading them, he was bringing them back, but he'd read 4 or 5 newspapers a day. And that instilled that in me. I have, for everywhere I've ever lived, gotten a daily newspaper delivered to my home, including when I was in college. I had the Baltimore Sun delivered.
Now, do you have any kind of routine around that? If you get a paper delivered to your home, do you go out and get that paper in the morning and sit down and read it with your coffee or something like that?
Yes, I do every morning. In fact, my dog waits at the door because she knows I'm going to go out. She doesn't come out with me. She just knows I'm going to go to that door first. Go out, get the paper, come back in. I read it every morning, first thing in the morning. And I've done that for years. And to the point now where I get a digital copy. So if I'm out of town, I can look at my local paper digitally on my iPad in the same format. And I read it every day, even when I'm on vacation. Absolutely.
It's awesome and interesting. Now, working at a liquor store and selling lotto tickets as well, which is a lot of... Why do liquor stores also sell lotto tickets? And what did you learn about the human experience selling liquor? Did you ever feel guilty? Did your dad ever feel guilty? Is there any kind of a contradiction about humanity selling liquor? And it's interesting, of course, now that your whole career is dedicated to quitting tobacco. But, I'm sure that they say it's recession proof. It's a pretty good business to be in, no doubt. But what did you learn about working at a place like that?
I think there was a handful of people who, the minute the door opened, were in there buying a pint of whiskey, day to day getting it. And I think he had some sympathy for those people.
Sure.
He wasn't going to take their money when they bought the pint of whiskey. But I think the vast majority of his clients were, a lot of hunters and fishermen. They'd come in, they'd get a case of beer to go out on their boat fishing. There was, sporting events to watch. You didn't get a sense that that the vast majority of those people were coming in daily because they were alcoholics or anything like that. But there was certainly a crowd you could identify that were doing that. But I don't think he ever felt bad about that. I think your point about it being recession proof is the reason he did it, because as the family was getting bigger, so that business, the news agency, was started by my great grandfather.
Wow.
And he had one son who had one son and a daughter. Now with the 2 kids, it was like maybe this one business can't sustain all of the people who need to be employed. And so he was looking for a way to expand the business. And when the liquor store opportunity came up, it was kind of perfect for him as far as expanding his business. I don't think he went into it thinking, it's recession proof. I think he went into it saying, I need a second line of income because the newspaper business is not going to sustain this family forever. And his view was always, I would be the next one to take it over, right? Me and my brother would be the next group to take it over, and it would just be there forever, because that's sort of how small businesses operated in the early part of the 20th century. But that was not happening. The town that I grew up in, there was one factory that sustained the town. It was a town of about 18,000 people. There was a glass factory that employed 6,000 people. That's 1/3 of the town, right? That shut its doors in 1983, and that spelled the end of the town.
What was the name of that town?
It was Bridgeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
It's down, so there's 3 counties along the Delaware Bay. Cape May County is the most famous, right, the very bottom of the state. We're the county just to the west of that, Cumberland County, and then Salem County butts up against the Delaware River. So it's really the garden part of the Garden State. It's a lot of farmland. It had an industrial base that was sort of factory-driven in these small towns, including the town I grew up in. And none of that's there anymore. My brother still works for a glass factory. It's like one of the last ones that still operates. He's a manager over at the glass factory in the town adjacent to where we grew up, still there. Going to see him.
When I met Val, my wife, she grew up in Michigan. They call liquor stores party stores. Did you know that?
No. And I don't think that terminology was used in South Jersey too much.
No, I don't think so either. I'd never heard of it my whole life, though. It's like 25 in Detroit. I wonder if listeners will know what I'm talking about. All right. So you go off to college, you want it out, you went to Johns Hopkins undergrad in Baltimore, and then you went to University of Florida for med school. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Why did you want to become a doctor?
That town I grew up in, I could not see myself working behind that counter all day, every day for the rest of my life. I just watching the body language of my dad even, right? I couldn't picture myself standing behind the counter and selling the same pint of whiskey to the same guy every day at 7 a.m. when the store opened up.
Did he not like that job? Did he not like doing that?
I think he did like doing that. The body language was, it's a long day,
Yeah, sure.
Especially when he first owned it, because he would be there all hours. And then, of course, eventually he was able to get a night manager and he would be there early. And he had a good lifestyle. Trust me. I don't think he would ever complain about the lifestyle he had. But I didn't look like the thing that was going to fulfill me, Pete. I think that was the problem. Standing still was not a thing for me, I guess. And so when you look around a small town, well, what are the other job opportunities in this small town? Well, it was primarily people working at factories or small business owners, kind of the secondary businesses. So we had a secondary business, and I wasn't going to go work at a factory. So then the next tier you're looking at is sort of the doctors and lawyers in town, right? And, I always said, oh, well, they were high profile jobs. They weren't high profile. They were just, my doctor was the greatest human being I'd ever met. He was a family doctor, George Varga. He was the town pediatrician, basically, because he was a family doctor. He was at every event. Like, you'd go to the football games and be playing football. His son would be playing. He'd be in the stands. They'd announce him as the doctor on call tonight, Dr. George Varga. So when I say high profile, like a prominent figure in the community. And I was like, that's kind of what I want to do. I'd like to do something like that. And then, of course, Quincy M.E., of all things.
I was going to say, was there oftentimes, if it's not like a parent or relative that influences you to pursue a job, it's a TV show that makes you want to be a lawyer or doctor or something like that?
I loved Quincy M.E. Jack Klugman.
He's great.
Jack Klugman.
Yeah.
And I just thought, and I was a teenager when that show was on, and I used to watch that show, and I just loved that kind of incorrigible character who lived on a boat and always went to the bar at the end of the night. He just seemed like such a curmudgeon-y, cool guy. So those two things probably more than anything prompted me to do it. But I went in, like, I'm the first person that ever went to college in my family, let alone medical school. So I went in kind of ass over tea kettle. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was a good student. I went to a college prep. I had enough sense to go to a private college prep school in a town adjacent to where I lived. And that really was a great experience, and it made me really a good student, a better student. I was always a good student, a free thinker. I think I learned a lot of free thinking at that school. And I met my best friend, who's still an animator in Los Angeles, a guy that I met on the bus like day one of school, who was the best man at my wedding, and just had an amazing experience. And I just kind of bumbled my way into getting into Johns Hopkins. I didn't know what I was doing. I had limited help. Even the school I went to, which is a college prep school, didn't really have much information on Johns Hopkins, but I ended up getting in and just really having a great experience there as well, really excelling in my college days.
I know you told me that your mom passed away unexpectedly when you were 29. Your dad is still alive, 91 years old. And I wonder what your parents thought of you, not only being the first one to go to college, but becoming kind of doctor. That's a pretty big deal. They must have been pretty...
They were extremely proud of me.
Brag about you? They brag
By the way,
about you?
my dad is 80. The 91 was the year my mom died, so I don't want to misspeak.
I just added 11 years to your dad. Okay, your dad, forgive me. Sorry.
He's 80. He was on the podcast recently, too. He's on the Christmas episode. We reviewed the Platters Christmas album, and he joined us, and it's pretty funny.
Oh, my God. I want to interview him about his owning a liquor store and his whole that sounds like a fascinating life. So anyway, what did they think of you being a physician, becoming a physician?
They were incredibly proud and still are. And the thing about my family, well, especially my dad, my mom was a pretty emotional Italian, so you knew where she was on things. But my dad was always kind of quiet. Didn't really say it to you, but then you'd go hang out. He used to go to this club in town, Fifth Ward Athletic Club, which was just a place for old guys to go sit around and have a beer together. And I would go, when I'd go home and visit, down there to have lunch, because I knew all these guys from growing up there in town. Yeah. And they'd come up behind me and go, your dad talks about you all the time. He's so proud of you, But my dad says that rarely, but they were incredibly proud of that accomplishment. But the funniest thing about it was and I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit, when we decided to move to Los Angeles, I remember him looking at me and going, "Why are you going to do that?" And I went, "Because I can." And he just looked at me and he nodded, and that was the end of the conversation. He always he let me do my own thing, and that was always very cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's as I'm thinking about right now with Ava, who's 17, and letting her do her own thing is terrifying me, because I've got a lot of answers over here, Barry.
I know. We know it all, don't we?
Yeah. I know exactly what's going to happen. So just listen to me, and I'll tell you, this is what will happen if you go over here. This is what will happen if you go over there. And my word is the truth, according to what I think. That's cool that your dad reacted that way. So you go out to California, and because you actually didn't really want to practice traditional medicine. You didn't want to actually be a kind of traditional pediatrician, and you went out and worked in the film industry with your buddy out there, and you and your wife, who I haven't really talked with you about. But what was that experience? I mean, you worked in the film industry. You worked eventually for James Cameron, the famous director. You told me between Titanic and Avatar.
My claim to fame. I worked with him between Titanic and Avatar on all the projects you've never heard of, all the documentaries that he did, underwater documentaries. He went back to Titanic.
What is a doctor doing in the film industry?
Well, I went out there not necessarily thinking, I'm going to be a doctor in the film industry. I wanted to work in the film industry. So I was happy going out and doing grunt work. And my plan was, such as it was. And by the way, you're in a good marriage so I'd been married maybe a year and a half when I sprung this on Darby that that I was interested in going to Los Angeles. And she was like, well, we don't own a house and we don't have any kids. So yeah, why not?
Wow.
I mean, it was that easy of a discussion. Like, let's go have an adventure.
That sounds awesome. Lucky you.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really great experience. So we moved from North Carolina to Los Angeles without a grand plan. Darby got a job at the LA County Department of Health as a staff physician, and I was going to go wing it. I got out there. I knew you could do kind of temporary staffing jobs in California because it's such a big community, especially in Los Angeles. So I got out there. I got enrolled with at the time it was Cigna, and started working some, shifts, day job shifts, which are fine. You're not on call. There's no weekends if you don't want them. You get paid, X dollars an hour to go see patients. And it was a great experience. And then I was trying to work my way into the film industry. How do I get involved? And I took one of these stupid, I say stupid, but in retrospect, it was probably the smartest thing I ever did. I took a networking thing in the film industry, because I don't know anybody.
How to meet people and
meeting other people. Yeah, absolutely. Because my contacts were all animators. Well, I don't draw, so I can't work on an animated film. And they had contacts, and I went through that thing. But I met this guy at this workshop that I just hit it off with. I'm still in contact with. I just wrote his Christmas card the other night. Huh. And he wanted to be a film producer. at some point I get a postcard from him and it says, come to the premiere of this film called Mulligan, short film Mulligans. And I look and my buddy had produced a film and I got a card to go to the premiere, little premiere of this short. So I go down there and I go, his name was Pete, also Peter. I go, Peter, why am I just hearing about this with a postcard? And he goes, what do you mean? I go, I would have done anything on that film set for you. You know what I mean? I would have raked the greens before the shot, whatever you needed me to do. I would have done it. He goes, I'll make a note of that. So at some point he goes to produce another film. It's a weird little film called The Yellow Badge of Courage. I don't know nothing about it, but he calls me and he goes, listen, I need a set medic. We're going to do a couple things. We got some special effects, got an acetylene torch on the set. Well, you come out and sit on the set, make sure nobody gets hurt. I go, yeah. He goes, well, you also do the craft service table. And I go, yes. He goes, well, wait, now I'd like everybody to have a hot breakfast. Is that impossible? I go, no, because I had a deli experience with my family. I could cook. I knew my way around a little stove. So I took this unpaid gig. Basically, I volunteered my time to be on this film set. And I went through every department, Pete. I wanted to see what the electricians did. Yeah. What the heck's the gaffer? I did all of that. Went to the special effects department. I was tearing up a couch one day with wire cutters so a guy could pop out through the couch. And I was everywhere. And the director of that film, co-director, was a guy named John David Cameron. And I was introduced to him early on. And then eventually it worked its way to me that he was obviously Jim's brother, James Cameron's brother. And I hit it off with him as well. And so years later, like I worked in the film industry doing this. I worked my way up. At one point I got called about cooking. I got a job as the craft service guy. And I go, well, I'm a medic. I go, yeah. But we hear you make a really good egg omelet. So I got one job just because I could cook. And I was having a blast. And I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was on a film set, was doing my thing. Yeah. And then I'd go make up the income seeing patients between these little film gigs that I was doing. And I was having a hoot. I get this really weird call from John David Cameron, who I call Dave. He's got about 1 million names, but I knew him as Dave. And he's like, I have a consult for you if you're interested. And I took the consult and he needed a report on Lyme disease because his brother was buying a ranch and they had ticks and they thought they had Lyme disease. And what do we need to know? I did like a book report on Lyme disease. And when I took him the report, he goes, well, where's the invoice? I go, oh, shoot, I left it on my desk. Invoice. I don't know from invoicing, right? I don't know what I'm doing. So I go down, I go back home and I go, well, now I got to figure out what I'm supposed to charge for this. Like the ball's in my court, right? I have to determine what I'm going to charge for this. So I think about it. I'm like, well, I'm a professional, like an attorney. I'm just going to name an hourly rate. And it took me a couple hours to do the report. I'll invoice him X amount of dollars. So go back down, take him the invoice. He looks at it. He puts it over here. He doesn't say a word. I was like, I didn't charge enough. He didn't even blink when I handed him this invoice. And the next thing I knew, I was getting called about setting up medical gear for a boat, for a film project. And I was kind of in the fold. And I worked for those guys for about 3 years. It was so cool.
What a faithful decision on that. Whatever price you decided to charge, it must have been the right one because they kept bringing you back. Maybe you should. Yeah. But I don't know if you.
But I trace it back further than that, Pete. I think about the day I was on the film set making oatmeal for his little short film. And it was something about my always thing, and I've had friends who say this too, I've gotten to do so many cool things, and people go, well, why? And I go, because I said yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of people would say, though, that it has to do with your understanding or lack of understanding, or I don't know, of your own ego. I mean, you're a physician. You went to great schools, and you can save people's lives. You're a physician. You're a doctor. Everybody knows what that means. And yet, when asked to do craft service, which is unskilled labor for the most part, and it's not the most respectable job, it's the least respected job probably on the set, you're like, sure. And that's a weird thing. That I think a lot of people would say, I'm not doing that. I'm a doctor, for God's sake. Like Captain, what's his name on Star Trek? I'm a doctor. I'm not
craft service.
I'm not doing craft service. Bones.
Yeah, no, I think when you want to pursue something, like I'm interested in pursuing something, I think you have to go in egoless.
Yeah, sure.
Like I don't know anything about this, and I can't really go in and go. I've had the opposite reaction. I'll tell you a funny story. I first moved to L.A., and I was, I went downtown I was in downtown Glendale on a weekday for whatever reason. I was in a tie-dye shirt, some crappy shorts, and I was walking by one of the banks down there, and there was two guys in their suits standing there on the corner, and they sneered at me when I walked by them. In my head, I went, if you only knew who I was. Sure. But, it's just like, just because I'm dressed down, I don't know why I got to get a dirty look from a couple of
So you do have bankers. An ego.
I do have an ego. Okay. Of course I have an ego. I mean, I know what I've accomplished, and I'm proud of what I accomplished. It's not that I'm egoless, but I don't wear that a lot,
Yeah, well, let me just ask you this one question that I like to ask a lot of men, especially men who've been married, quote, successfully as long as you have with Darby. How many years together?
I'll be 32 this summer.
2 kids, grown up, seemingly well-adjusted, smart, great relationships with them. But as you mentioned, your wife is also a physician. You guys also are big into running. You've run lots and lots of big races. You actually work as a running coach, but you run with your wife. You guys have fun with it. You wear costumes sometimes, whatever. My larger question, because all I know is that you're married this long and that you run together, meaning you have a thing that you do together, which I think is really important, not necessary, but important in a lot of relationships. So my simple question and unoriginal question is, what is the key to your success of your marriage? How have you guys gotten along for so well?
Listen, my wife is the lowest key person. Like, thank goodness, right? Because I can be a bit of a.
What does that mean? Like that? What is?
She doesn't react to if I'm over here blustering about blah blah blah. I'll get off on a tangent about whatever the story of the day is in the paper. I'll be yelling about. Today it was that they're charging for email. Doctors are going to start charging for emails to physicians, which I think is fair. But you read the article and you hear these people complaining about, well, they've been doing it for free for all these years. And well, because they're seeing, 3 million emails a year that they have to answer. So I'll go off on a tangent.
What is that issue that someone sends an email with a question or something?
So now everything's online, right? So like my wife and my physician, right? I go to Cleveland Clinic. So there's this thing called My Chart. I go in, I send my doctor an email with a question. He writes back an answer. Well, that's like I've avoided a medical visit via email. And he's not seeing any income from answering my question, right? Again, I've asked him his opinion, and he sent it to me and can't really bill for that or charge for that. I don't think that's right. I see both sides of the argument. I understand as a patient, it's like, well, it's just a simple question, but it is just what the doctors do. So, and then what's the line on what's a simple question? Like if I write one sentence, I can't bill, but if I have to write a paragraph, I can. So anyway, a lot of hospital systems have started to charge for this.
I've avoided that by making friends with as many physicians in as many different backgrounds and specialties as possible.
I know. I get texts all the time from you, Pete. I understand.
Hey, Barry, tell me what this, what is this spot? Look
at this thing on my foot. What is this?
What's wrong with my face? Everything.
Well, that I can't.
Yeah, nothing can be done. Okay, so yeah, that's interesting.
So anyway, that was in the paper today, and I'm blowing off steam about how could somebody not understand? And she just looks and, and she's in the issue. She's one of the people who's going to be billing for this at Cleveland Clinic. And so I'll get off on a political tangent or some diatribe about something, and she'll nod and she'll just let me go through it without getting angry about the fact that I'm off on some tangent or something like that. I'm the one that spouts a lot like that, and she does not. And like the thing about moving to LA, if you'd have told me 18 months into my marriage that I would suggest we move to LA, and then she would just go, of course. That would have been, that's what I mean about her low-key nature. We have always never had a grand plan, just sort of a plan to do stuff. And we like to travel. We like to see stuff. That's always been the case. And then we added the running, which makes us go places maybe we wouldn't have traveled before, which has made it fun. And that's all kind of empty nest stuff that we started that just before my son left for college. And it's become a huge part of what we do now to fill a void of not having kids in the home.
Sure. That's probably an interesting question for a lot of people to answer. When your kids moved out, did you recognize that there would be a void? You probably did, but what if anything did you do? That's fascinating that's what you guys you chose. You acknowledge it and you chose this, and you guys have gone for it. And it sounds you've seen a lot of really cool places.
Had a ton of great experiences all over the country. We have this thing now where we're trying to run a big race in every state. And I think we're at 20 states or something like that. And, I'm booking trips to Oregon and Washington and Nevada just to run races and knock those states off the map. But we built a whole vacation around that. And we basically go, okay, let's do a race this Saturday and this Saturday. We'll have to drive from Portland to Seattle, and we'll figure out what the middle of that looks like. And then we make up a trip. It's so much fun.
Given everything that you know about medicine, the human body, and actually running, you know a lot about running. You're a running coach. Will you admit that running's it's not great for you physically?
I don't think long term it's good for your joints. I started late, so I have a little bit of an advantage. I think if somebody started in their 30s and did it for 30 years, that there would be problems attached to that. I think the shoe technology's gotten better, which has helped a lot with that. And I also think this new, like I do interval running, which is, I'll run 3 minutes and walk 30 seconds.
What kind of a psychotic, that sounds nerve wracking.
I ran my best marathon doing exactly that.
Really? You run for how long?
Run for I do 3 minutes and I walk for 30 seconds, but there are groups that do 90 seconds and 30. So we did the New York Marathon doing 90 seconds of running and 30 seconds of walking. That's a lot of turn, but that's what Derby wanted to do. So we were doing it together.
Why is that? What does that do?
So your heart rate, it gives you time to recover your heart rate more than anything. That's the big thing. But in doing that walking, you actually conserve some of your endurance toward the end of the race. So you're actually stronger at the end of the race than you would be if you ran 18 miles nonstop and ran out of gas.
I can't even imagine. You start running and then you stop running, and then you start running again and you stop running.
I did it this morning. A
time-lapse video of that would be hilarious. What's wrong with this person?
And then I'm listening to you this morning while I'm doing it. And so, I'm running, and the buzzer goes off and I'm walking.
I swear to God, I'm glad you told me that, because if I was just out running myself or out in the park and I saw someone doing that, I go, what is this person doing? Why do they keep stopping?
I'm sure people in the neighborhood say that to me all the time as they're driving by me. And all of a sudden he just stopped. Then he just started because it's in my headphones. I can hear it in my headphones.
Wearing a Spider-Man outfit.
Well, not in the neighborhood. Well, not while I'm running in the neighborhood.
I could stay on any one of these subjects or parts of your life for a long time, but I still have to get to two big things. And first, I want to talk about the podcast. You and your daughter, Abigail, she's 25?
She's 28.
She's 28. And your son is 25.
My son's 25.
We don't talk about him. Is that right?
We keep him, and we keep him under wraps. He's a good kid. He lives up in Orlando. He's a techie kind of guy. He works primarily from home now, and he's just a really mellow, good guy. And but he's not. He's got. I think I mentioned this one time on a hangout. He's got high frequency hearing loss that was congenital. It's actually genetic, which we figured out through 23andMe.
What does that mean? High frequency.
So he can hear lower tones pretty normally, but the higher tones he can't. So he's completely correctable with these high-end hearing aids, because you can program out, you can dial the volume up on the high frequencies and leave the low frequencies normal. And so it balances your hearing. It's not like the old things that you saw 40 years ago where people would have feedback and noise and everything was just super loud. It's very precise to the range of hearing that he has lost to normalize it so it's balanced. But he is hearing aid dependent. But he's not been a very vocal kid as a result of that, because he had kind of a slow start, if you know what I mean. Like, he wasn't very social in environments because he couldn't hear well. And so he didn't speak a lot. And that's kind of carried over to his adulthood as far as just engaging in conversation. Now, I've heard him working here. He'll come home to see us and he'll have his computer on to do his work. And he's so engaging on the phone with clients that he's walking through technical stuff on the computer. And I'm like, where's this kid been? Like, it's fun to watch your kids in their own environment, right? Because you have an interaction with them that's a certain way because of all of your history.
Yeah.
And then when you watch them in an environment that doesn't involve you, it's always fascinating. And so it's good to see him being that verbal, because he doesn't just jump into situations and command an audience. But Abigail totally does. She's totally. So I think Zach's more like Darby, and I think Abigail's more like me in that regard.
Abigail and you have been hosting Pops on Hops now for how long? How many episodes you guys?
We have. I'm editing the 48th episode.
Wow, congratulations!
And it's just about 2 years.
Where did this idea come from? How do you have? Tell me about your relationship with your daughter.
Well, I think we've always had a great relationship. And she was performative, like the way I was saying about how she can come in and command a room. She's always been performative like that, very verbal. And during the pandemic, they were in and out because everybody was working from home. She was down here one time and she just said, I think we should start a podcast.
It was her idea. She came up to you and said,
yeah. But that was the idea. I think we should start a podcast. So we just knocked it around. What are we going to do? We both had an interest in music. Obviously craft beer. Anyway, and knocking it around, we just, at some point, the Pops on Hops thing came up as a pediatrician to just, Hop on Pop, the children's book, is sort of where that, I think, came from. And as soon as it came out of, I don't know who said it first, but as soon as it came out of their mouths, that was it. It's like, oh, that is it. The title defined what it was going to be. And so we talked about it. And I was reasonably convinced we were just going to talk it to death as these things go. And Christmas that year, it would have been 2 years ago, I bought the gear and wrapped it up and put it under the tree for her. And when she opened it, I said, so we're committed now. When are we going to do? And so we did a couple of pilots to see how it went. John Carroll, God bless him, was nice enough to listen to some of the early stuff we did to go, yes, I think you're onto something, continue. I didn't know what the heck we were doing. So we pushed through it, and I've had a blast doing it. I see her more and talk to her more now than I did for years leading up to this, to be honest with you.
As a result of working on the podcast together?
Yeah, because we get together at least once a month to record. We'll do maybe 2 at a time, or we'll do them on Zoom when we can. But if we're going live to places, which we like to do, we usually, if we're going to drive to Jacksonville, we're going to do more than one. That's a long drive, whatever. And so we get together at least once a month to do this.
I love it.
And a lot of prep work, and, who needs a photo of what for this cover. And there's a lot of elements that we do. So we're in contact a lot, and it's been really, really good. And I think we've gotten better over time. I feel like we've hit a stride with it probably about a year ago, where I went, okay, this is sustainable as far as, I like the content. I think the content's good. I think we're good together on there. So we've had a great time. And the amount of support that your audience has given us is astounding to me.
Love that. Yeah, I love that. You've had Pete Co works with you sometimes doing jingles.
Pete Co did a bunch of jingles. And the Christmas bonus this year has 3 of the members of our community from Thursday Nights on there. Nick Martino and his wife did an original. So they recorded specifically for the show.
Wow, that's great.
Matt Carlson, same thing. He recorded a song. Now, he did a Harbor Coat song, and he liked it so much, he released it as a single for Harbor Coat, which was super cool. And then John Carroll submitted a song and an intro for us. And it's just like these guys, they couldn't wait to do it. I think John Carroll was the first person who sent me this intro. He's like, I can't get it tonight. Can I get it to you tomorrow? I'm like, it's November, John. I got time. Relax.
He's done so much good. He's done so much good for so many people. I love his work. I really love his work, his style. He's just so talented, and so are so many other people. Obviously, including you. I'm so happy that you're doing this and that you're doing it with your daughter, and it's definitely given me the idea to do more stuff like that with my girls, and hopefully they'll agree to do it more with me consistently. And it's such a great. And she's 25 years old. Oh, she's the 28-year-old.
She's 28,
and it's wonderful that you have that with her, and that you get to drink and talk about things that you like and drink things that you like. So great for you and your family. Congratulations. Everybody should go listen. If you haven't yet, Pops and Hops, go subscribe to it, review it, do all of the things, because Barry is such a great guy, and it's a really good show. Shared excerpts from it, and I'm just it's really high quality. Everybody should definitely check it out. Before I let you go, I want to ask you just about your work, because it's a fascinating and super important work that you do, which is basically, and for years you've been doing this now in Florida, this anti-tobacco campaign. Quit Doc, everybody, is the website. Oh, I just had it up here. Quitdoc.org, is it?
.com. Quitdoc.com.
And
I think if you type any of them in, it rolls over. I think I own them
all. Tell me about
quitdoc.com.
How you got involved with Quit Doc.
Well, coming out of the LA experience, we moved back to Florida to be close to my mother-in-law, who had lost her husband. And I didn't really have a job that translated to the move. Like, I was coming with a fresh set of eyes. And when I got here, I had a good friend from medical school who was a pulmonologist over in Sarasota. And he was working on tobacco cessation. And he was starting up some cessation clinics in the state of Florida. He's asked me if I'd help him with that. And I said, I'd be delighted, but that's adult medicine, which is a little weird for me. But if you will let me do youth prevention on top of that, I would be delighted to do that. So we did that. And I started this nonprofit to work on specifically youth tobacco prevention. I think my thing, Pete, was I did not want to go back and see patients day to day in an office anymore. And I was looking for a way to do more of a media-based approach to public health. And I thought the tobacco prevention world was a great place to be able to kind of push that a little bit.
A media-based approach to public health, meaning some kind of public awareness campaign about a thing.
Yeah, or even if that was community outreach, when I say media-based, also when you talk to a group of 100 kids in an assembly, as opposed to seeing patients one by one in an office, I always felt like that was more efficient.
Oh, man, can I just say, I think you probably heard me say, that worked for me. Like any of those people that came and gave the assembly in the auditorium, first of all, I was just psyched to have something different than sitting in class. And so I was like, oh, this is great. We have an assembly today. I don't care who's talking. And, but guy comes out in a wheelchair and says, don't drink and drive. I'm like, loud and clear. Got it. Thank you. Obviously he told his whole story, but from that to, other drugs things and sex stuff. And, all those things, whenever those speakers would come, they usually had a good amount of credibility to tell their story. So it always made an impact on me. And those who didn't, I'm not saying it works for everybody, but I think those are good things to do is all I'm saying.
I think there's a lot of kids who are just trying to find their place in the world. And some of the messaging they're getting is from their peers. Oh, you should do this. It's cool. It's hip. It's whatever. And then you have to put a competing message out there that maybe it's not, and let them, they're going to decide what they're going to decide. Right. And that was my thing. Whenever I went into a room, I was always like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just going to give you as much information I can so that when you make that decision, you're at least making an informed decision. I don't want you to make a bad decision without having the information as to why that was a bad choice. So that was always my approach. The other thing I like to do was I always focused on media literacy, which is talking about timely with the internet and some of the stuff that's going on, things like TikTok. The kids are not aware of how they're being marketed to by the tobacco industry because so much of it is cleverly done. And so just pointing stuff out. So I did a lot of things where we dissected advertising and I showed them how an advertisement worked to draw them in and also said to them, and by the way, this applies to breakfast cereal. Like you can use the same technique to look at how somebody's trying to sell you something you don't want and don't need. And so I did a lot of that kind of stuff. And that was kind of coming out of my LA experience. So I used to do a ton of those things. But the program that I work for, Tobacco Free Florida, I don't work for them. I subcontract in some of the communities in the state. that was how we started. Like back in the 2008, 2010 era, we would do tons and tons and tons of school presentations. But when the CDC updated their recommendations on what it would look like to do a tobacco prevention program, what would really work, policy change became a big part of that. And that was something that I had never really experienced, right? I didn't know policy change.
So the difference being, just to be clear, you would go into schools, you would do educational workshops, assemblies, talks, and then the CDC at some point said those are effective, but not as effective as changing laws around who gets tobacco, where you can use tobacco would be. That's where we really will see effective changes. Am I hearing that correct?
Yes, that's totally correct. You're dead on. So the idea was that you can make a bigger impact if you change the rules in the community, or you changed how people viewed tobacco use in the community. You would change sort of a positive peer pressure kind of approach to kids. It would be a way to give them some messaging that would help them make that decision. So the state of Florida changed the way we operate on these grants to do a lot of that. We would do it in the local community. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but when e-cigarettes hit the market in 2008, there was never an age restriction at the federal level. There was never an age restriction at the state level.
It's a weird thing that they introduced e-cigarettes. Somehow they got into stores without any laws around who could. Is that weird? There was
a very, if you'll give me a second to explain this, it's really actually an interesting and complicated story. The FDA saw them arriving about 2008, realized they were a problem. They were being marketed as helping people quit. So the FDA wanted to regulate them as a drug delivery device, like any other drug delivery device. And they put a moratorium on the import. Well, they were sued by the e-cigarette industry. Two companies at the time, Cetera and Smoking Everywhere, were the two that were involved in the lawsuit. And this would have been about April of 2009. The FDA had to let them continue to sell them in the argument as the case went through the court. And the argument was on the part of the e-cigarette industry, you can't regulate these. These are tobacco products. They're not drug delivery devices. And the FDA doesn't have the right to regulate tobacco, which was true in April of 2009. But it wasn't true in June of 2009. That's when President Obama signed the Tobacco Control Act that gave the FDA the right to regulate tobacco for the first time ever in its history.
Wow.
And so that's in the middle of the court case. So when the court case is settled, the judge agreed with the e-cigarette industry and said, you're right. They can only regulate you as a tobacco product. Well, at that point, the FDA had the right to regulate tobacco. And that's the battle we've been fighting now for the last dozen years, is just trying to get the FDA to regulate these products as effectively as they have done with cigarettes.
Who are you fighting in this case? It feels like the tobacco industry used to have all the power and every politician in their pocket.
Primarily now it is the e-cigarette industry, because they've gotten big enough and have enough power that they themselves function as a consortium. It's complicated because some of the tobacco industry saw the threat and actually bought vaping companies. So they sell cigarettes and they sell vaping products because they're hedging their bets which one of these is going to be more appropriate. So one of the first ones that was sold was Blue e-cigarettes. It was purchased by Lorillard, which at the time was the third biggest cigarette company in the United States. Marlboro, the makers, I should say, Altria, bought Juul for the same reason, or made a big investment in Juul to kind of play both sides of it. So they come to that with a lot of power now because they also have their tobacco industry history. So that's the hardest thing. The case is always made among particularly e-cigarette users that these are good products. They're helping me quit, and you should not regulate them. And really, they're not helping anybody quit. They're helping them switch. Nicotine addiction is a nicotine addiction. There's probably some benefits with respect to cancer risk with vaping devices, but heart attack risks is essentially the same because it's just high dose nicotine. So all the cardiovascular effects are not going to go away. But we're not going to know that for 30 years, right, Pete? So the problem is that a company comes in and have a product that's going to be liquid nicotine in this thing with some chemicals that you inhale. They've got no data to support their claims that it's safe. They say it's safer, but everybody hears safe. And we just run an experiment on the population. Like if I did that as a doctor, like if I said, oh, we're not going to treat these people with syphilis, let's just see what happens to them, which happened, right, in the United States, that's malpractice.
Right.
So to let a company come in with this product that's never been demonstrated to be safe by any independent studies and let them flood the market with it is how there's always an advantage. When you allow that to happen without a study, and then the science has to play catch up, right? We go through this with the vaccines, right? I can just claim that the COVID vaccine causes heart attacks, and the science has to catch up on that to prove that it doesn't. That's not how this should work, right? I mean, they did enough studies on the vaccines to prove they were safe. Yes, we're going to now increase the population. We're going to find some minute changes, like maybe some people do have heart inflammation from the vaccine, but significantly lower than the amount who have heart inflammation from the virus. Well, this is what's going on with the vaping stuff. We'll know in 30 years that cancer risk was reduced by 70% or 50% or 5%, and that heart attacks were the same. I can only guess that based on what I know about the chemicals in the device now. But in that 30 years, we've addicted so many more kids. The rate of youth vaping in the United States is equal to what cigarettes were 20 years ago. So we've reduced cigarette use and cigar use to significantly small levels. Like in Florida, less than 2% of high school students smoke cigarettes or smoke cigars, but 20% vape.
Wow.
And 20% used cigarettes, 20 years ago. So we worked hard to get that number down, but we had this big threat from the vaping industry. And the more money they have, the more they go to the legislatures and they kind of demand, changes in the law, or you'll go with a good idea and then it'll get railroaded by the vaping industry.
And you've seen all that. You've seen the inner workings of that.
Oh, absolutely.
You'll talk to a politician, a state representative or senator, and then the lobbyist from the other side will talk to them, and you'll see that all play out.
Yeah, here's a great example. So in 2020, we had a bill that was running through the Florida House and Senate to basically codify the FDA rules in Florida statute. So what that means is the age was 21 at the federal level by then. Let's make it 21 in Florida. Let's ban the same flavored products that the FDA has banned. Let's license the retailers who sell these products as tobacco retailers, since it is a tobacco product. It was a really good bill, and it made it through both the House and the Senate, and Ron DeSantis vetoed it. And in his veto statement, he used the buzzwords that, the industry got to him. They said, if we ban flavors, we're just going to create a black market. Well, that's a canard. We know that's a canard because that's like saying we just shouldn't have a speed limit because people speed. Yeah, if somebody creates a black market, that's illegal. You can catch them. You can find them.
It's the same argument they make about guns.
Yeah,
right?
It's the same thing all the time, right? So he basically vetoed it because somebody got in his ear and said, you're just going to create a black market. So the next year, the woman who ran that bill in the Senate was the Senate majority leader that year. So she couldn't run a bill. So she got one of her colleagues to run the exact same bill. They were going to run it again, do it exactly again. They start the bill, same language, everything's great. And at some point, they start tinkering with it. And now all of a sudden they had a preemption clause that says, well, we're going to set the rules at the state level. And so local communities can't do this. And the reason that was so important is because they were going to license the retailers, but it was going to be voluntary and they didn't have to pay for it. Whereas local communities were actually charging for a real license that would improve enforcement of the rules.
Right.
So this bill, as it starts to go through, all the public health groups jump on and say, stop, this is not good. American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, everybody in public health was against this bill. And then that's the bill that passed with the preemption clause. And it basically wiped off hundreds of local ordinances that were designed to protect kids, like things like product placement, where you can't just have the tobacco sitting on the counter. It all went away because of this preemption clause that's in the bill. And that's the bill DeSantis signed. So that got railroaded by the industry, who were ready the second year. They weren't ready the first year to figure out how to change the bill in a bad way. And they totally railroaded it the second year. And you just watch that in real time. You go, what a sleazy set of tactics to do something basically that says, yeah, you can raise the age, but there's no enforcement plan in place. So you can't really check And I always said, well, you might as well make the age 100, because if I don't know where the stores are and I can't do a compliance check, you're not following the rules.
Sir, are you 100? I'm sorry.
So anyway, yes, I've seen that in real time in things that I have been involved in at the state level. And it's just really, it's not a great political climate, as you can imagine, in Florida to begin with.
Well, let me just ask you to wrap up. I thought of one more important question I wanted to get your take on, of course, is having the experience that you've had working in this nonprofit, working with policymakers, getting to know how legislation is made or destroyed, and paying such a close attention to the news and politics in general. You get it. You're a great guy to ask the following question about Florida politics. And your thoughts on Ron DeSantis as a presidential hopeful, because a lot of people that watch and pay attention to him and cover him say he would burn out fast. We get why we're talking about him, but it's like a Jeb Bush situation. He doesn't have the personality, charisma, energy, whatever it is. But the more important question than that, because that's just your opinion there, is more about, I guess this is your opinion as well, what he just announced with all those quack doctors and his Surgeon General there about wanting to investigate, I guess, the pharmaceutical makers, and they're going to cherry pick some document that they find internally where they're debating something about the vaccines, and they're going to cherry pick that and say they knew that this or that was possible, and they, and no one will ever pay attention to any of it. But what are your thoughts about DeSantis, and more specifically, what he announced last week about wanting to investigate the vaccine makers?
Well, first on DeSantis, for about 6 months after he took office, I had some hope that he wasn't going to be Trump-like, I'll say, which is kind of shorthand, right? He was certainly right-leaning, right of center, but he wasn't nuts. I think the pandemic changed that. And really, the thing that is ironic to me is when the vaccine first came out, he actually got it to really wealthy neighbors. I don't think you remember this scandal, but he got it in a couple of wealthy neighborhoods in Florida.
Yeah, I remember
He liked it. He liked it so much then, Pete, he wanted his friends to have it first. And we've come full circle now because politically, that's not the place he wants to be politically. He doesn't want to be pro-vaccine.
The scandal was that he was distributing the vaccine to people that he knew were of privilege, or maybe even voters, certain communities in Florida. That was the scandal. And now it's something completely different. It's the complete
opposite of that. Yeah. And that's sort of how he's managed to change. He's managed to morph in the state of Florida politically. I think the more notice he gets for a potential presidential run, the worse he's gotten with some of the sort of culture issue things that he's pulled in Florida. And then when you tinker with public health in the way that he just decided he was going to do with this panel, which is run by a quack doctor, our Surgeon General is a complete quack. It's very mind-numbing down here. And you go, I just say to Darby all the time, we should just leave. Like, why do we want to be here? And then the flip side is because we are the voice of reason. Maybe we need to be louder or find a way to do that. I feel like I don't know that I'd ever run for office. I always float that idea, and then I do get a stare from Darby. That's the one time she will stare me down. Is really? When I say, I think I should run for it. And she's like, no.
Oh, you'd be so great.
But working in public policy, I feel like I have made some changes, positive changes in the state of Florida, despite Ron DeSantis, working in a political way, I'll say, right? I mean, what you do when you're working on public policy is sort of trying to change the rules for everybody at the state level. And I like doing that. So I think I would continue to do that. The question is, should I shift lanes and should I move into something where I could be more vocal on issues like this thing with the vaccines? What does that look like? And I don't know the answer to that, but I have been entertaining. I always feel like I have attention deficit disorder that runs in about decades. Like I'll do something for about 10 or 12 years and then I'll kind of have burned out on it, get a little bit bored.
I think that's healthy. I think that's probably a really good thing to do to transition in and out of different careers, experiences, places to live. I got nothing but support for that. In
my age, you say, well, maybe I've got one last hurrah.
How old are you?
I just turned 60.
That's right.
So what would that look like? What's my last hurrah? And I'm contemplating that. What is it that I would like to work in? And I keep thinking it would be in politics on the side. Like I know a ton of people from the Democratic Party in Broward County. It'd be more in those kind of support roles than to run as a candidate.
Hummel for office.
That would not fly in this household. I can assure you.
I get it. I get it.
So anyway, that I worry about Florida because, I used to say it's a purple state. I'm not sure it's really purple anymore. I don't know if that's an effect of DeSantis specifically. I don't know if that was a voter turnout thing in some of the bluer counties. Right?
Because how do you define what is? I feel like the state should be defined by kind of whatever the kind of public opinion polling is on issues, not on candidates, but on issues. A state's red if overwhelmingly people live in the state they want no laws on guns. They want no access to abortion. Okay, those people overwhelmingly support these ideas. But in Florida, a lot of the issue is there's a lot of different, obviously, cultural and religious and opinions on all kinds of things. But it's gerrymandered. It's about the districts being written a certain way, which make the state representation different, much like I feel like Wisconsin and even, I don't know, other states as well.
So we passed a statewide ballot initiative to increase the minimum wage.
Right. Like the ballot initiatives.
Like a red state.
Right. The felon voting thing. They pass a lot of ballot initiatives that would determine how you would classify the politics of a state. That would be a good way to measure.
So for us to have a legislative delegation at the national level that's 20-8, right, that's just not right. That's a complete misrepresentation of the state. And I don't know how you fix that, but that's part of where I say maybe I have one more last hurrah in me. Is that the issue I want to work on? Do I want to work on getting the gerrymandering out of Florida? Do I want to work on, again, going to what can I do to make the biggest impact? And I keep thinking that the issue of gerrymandering in the state of Florida is one that it's like, well, if somebody knocked on my door today and said, would you come work on this campaign with me? I'd be out. I think I would do it. I think I would jump at the opportunity to do that. Maybe
you putting that out in the air right now is what it takes. Stranger things have happened. That's for sure. Well, I'm excited to see, we're all excited to see whatever that next chapter is. And I'm so happy to have gone through many of the chapters in our conversation today. You have been such a good friend to me and supporter and so helpful in so many ways. I am just eternally grateful to you for so much. It's been a real fun ride to have you along for. And I'm just, I can't say enough good things about you and how much I appreciate you.
Well, listen, the amount of education I've gotten out of you over the years. I was a huge radio fan, which is how I ended up getting serious in Florida because radio sucks down here. Yeah. It just sucks in Florida. And I found you accidentally on there. I was a Jay Thomas fan. You guys were on, I think it was Indy together. That's right. I heard the promo. I'm like, I should check this out morning while I'm sitting at my desk, and the rest is history. And I have learned so much from you. I was never a big time caller on the old radio show, but I did call a couple of times. First time I ever did that. And you know how it is with radio. It's an intimate experience. You always feel like you're the friend of the host. Yeah. And for me to look at you and say, I'm a friend of the host today is a really, really cool thing for me. And I really appreciate all that you've given me over the years, and that you would take the time to have this conversation with me today is very gratifying. So thank you, sir.
Go subscribe to Pops on Hops and go check out quickdoc.com, and you can make a donation over there to Barry's nonprofit if you want to support that. And if you're in Florida, hook up with Barry. We're all going to hook up at some point soon, maybe in Florida, as much as
hate to spend money in a DeSantis state.
There's a lot of people down there listen to the show, and obviously it's a fun place to be, especially certain times of the year. All right, man. Thank you so much for talking to me. We'll do it again soon. You can always often see Barry at our hangouts on Thursday nights. Thank you so much, Barry.
Thank you.
All right, there he goes. Barry Hummel, everybody. What did you think? I hope you liked that one. And if not, you should send hate mail to popsonhopspod.com and listen to their podcast. I kid, of course, about the hate mail. That was, I really enjoyed talking to Barry. I hope you did as well. We'd love for you to go check out his podcast that he co-hosts with his daughter, Abigail. And if you do, give him a review and support him in all the ways that you do me. Thank you very much for listening to our easygoing, lighthearted Tuesday Taint Week conversation today with Dr. Barry Hummel. Still planning on posting an episode for the next 3 days, but don't be surprised if I just punch out, because they're not in the can yet. But they should be. They should be. So look for a podcast each day, an episode each day this week. I hope you're enjoying your week. Let me know. Reach out to me and let me know what you're doing on your Taint Week. Stand up with Pete@gmail.com. And thanks to the new subscribers this week. Still time to get in before the year is over. Get counted for December and be a subscriber starting whenever you sign up. So sign up now at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. It's a free podcast, but I can't do it without you because it's not cheap. But please sign up now. All right, be the change you want to see in the world and tell me about your dreams. I don't know why I said that, but I'm always happy to hear from everybody. So reach out. Love you. John Carroll, take us away.
Off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. See him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.